Hi, this is Andrew, and this is my presentation, 5 reminders for revising my writing, or 5 things I learned this semester. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. And of course, we're talking about revising academic writing. And we'll start with number 1, embrace change. All right, we all know the structure, the basic structure when writing academic, any kind of academic paper. Basically, we're going to start with our outline, and we're going to develop our thesis, gather our sources, do our research, and put together our argument structure. When I say structure, I mean we're going to start putting together what's going to be in the body of our paper. How are we going to set up our paragraphs? How are we going to present sources, etc. From there, we're going to actually draft our paper. We're going to attempt to implement it. We're going to attempt to implement our outline. And as we're doing so, we're going to discover new ideas and we're going to discover new sources. From there, that's when the revision process actually starts. And when that starts, when I say embrace change, be prepared to change everything, even your thesis, based on what you've learned during the outline, drafting, and revision process. Sometimes, and this happened to me, sometimes I discover new sources as I'm trying to make a better argument. I learn new things throughout the drafting process, and I realize I'm wrong, and it's time to change my thesis. And don't be afraid to do that. That's something I need to remember from now on. And also, don't think of this, as a step-by-step process, a rigid step-by-step process. You should be revising throughout. You should revise your outline as you're making it, revise your draft as you're writing it. It's a very fluid process. So keep that in mind. Don't get too hung up on structure, just like you shouldn't get too hung up on your thesis necessarily or your argument. So be ready to make a lot of changes and be okay with that. Okay, so on to number 2, and that is don't wait. Time is never on your side. It's easier to fix bad writing than it is to start good writing. Write down as much as you can and worry about its quality later. In other words, just write. You will learn more from writing poorly than you will from writing nothing at all. Also, if there's nothing written down, it's going to be very hard to revise it. It's hard to fix if there's nothing there. So you're always better off just getting started, getting the ball rolling, putting down as much as you can, as many of your ideas as you can, and then going back through and fixing them later, because it's just going to make your life a lot easier. And you don't want to get too hung up on the quality of what you're putting down when you first get started. It's probably going to be bad. It can always be improved, no matter how much time you spend on it. You can always go back and find things you should have written differently, corrections that you can make always. So in an ideal world, of course, you're going to be so good that everything's going to come out great right from the start. And the more you practice, the better you'll get at it. But never feel bad about writing down just horrible, horrible work, just doing horrible work, as long as you're doing it early enough that you have plenty of time to go through and fix it. Then it's fine. And there's nothing wrong with that. So don't wait, don't put things off, get started early, and don't worry about the quality at first. It's something you can always fix later on in revision. So on to number 3, and that is, get ready to have some of your naysayers turn into supporters. Like this happened to me again, and this involved kind of changing my argument, my thesis. But be prepared for that. When you start looking for naysayers, just keep that in mind when you're doing it. Say, this naysayer, I might end up agreeing with them. And you might not agree with them entirely. So, your naysayer, you'll start out disagreeing with an argument. After doing more research, you might realize that your naysayer's argument is more convincing than you thought. And a lot of times this will just simply involve concessions, right? We'll go through. Uh, we'll try to pick apart their argument, but we'll have to concede some points. They do make valid points. Chances are you're a student. They probably have a PhD. They're probably better at this than you. You can admit that, and you can go ahead and give them credit where credit is due. So don't be afraid to concede some points to your naysayer. This will make you appear reasonable to the reader. It also helps, if you spotted, valid points in your naysayer's argument, then so did your reader, and you want them to be aware that you see that as well. Like I said, it makes you look more reasonable, and it also makes it easier for your reader to identify with you, which is always a good thing. So a lot of times you're just going to have to make concessions. So be prepared to do that from the beginning. Actually, try to look for good points from your naysayer, so you can always include them and always say, yeah, here's what they wrote that's valid, that I agree with. I mean, for me, I think that would be a good rule of thumb from here on out in all of my work. But then be prepared for them to end up being your supporter, or basically you supporting them, and be prepared for their arguments to become your arguments. And now you're not citing them as naysayers anymore. You are citing them as, support for your argument. So sometimes you might end up agreeing with your naysayers' arguments. Be prepared to change your own argument accordingly. And like I said before, be prepared to change your entire thesis. So when you start out with a naysayer, always be ready for that. Be ready to say this argument might actually be correct. I might be wrong. They might be right, and I might have to adjust, my entire paper accordingly. And if you're thinking that way from the beginning, it's going to be a lot easier to make those revisions later on. So always keep those things in mind. All right, on to number 5, or excuse me, number 4, and that is use your sources. This paper I've been doing this semester, the subject got a little bit obscure, and it was hard to find sources on the main go-to source that I use, which is the university library online. Now, one of the things that I noticed made my life a lot easier was to simply go to the reference list or the bibliography of the peer-reviewed scholarly journal articles that I did find on the subject I'm writing about, and use their bibliography, use their reference list to find more sources. So you're going to start out with your initial sources, and you're going to find those on the library website. After that, use their reference list to find more. And then read what they read. Go directly to the same source that they're using, find out where they're getting their argument from, find out what they learned. And I think a good rule of thumb for that is, with your initial sources, you want to look for the most modern one you can find, because obviously everything they reference is going to predate their work. So find the most contemporary initial source possible and go from there. And then that's where you're going to find your secondary sources. At least that's what I'm calling them. You find them in the bibliography, the reference list of whatever research you were planning on citing. And in their work, you're going to find more material for your argument. Whether you're going to find another naysayer, whether you're going to use the same naysayer that your initial source was using, whether you're going to find more evidence, maybe it's a naysayer against your naysayer, so it'll help support your argument, whatever. And then you're going to add them to your sources. So that's one thing I learned. If I'm having a hard time finding sources directly on the university website or library website, then I'll use the reference list or the bibliography of the few sources that I can find. And those are usually pretty good. So that's something, as you're reading through your references, as you're reading through your sources work, always pay attention to their citations, especially when you come across ideas that pique your interest, or that are going to help you out with writing your paper, that you want to explore more thoroughly. Pay close attention to those citations, make notes, and then go through their list to find those sources. And hopefully you'll be able to access them. Sometimes you can't. University of Albany does not have access to every single citation, every single source, but sometimes you can find other ways to work around that as well. Talk to your librarian. It helps. So that's it for finding more sources. And then finally, The last number 5. The more important your argument is to you as a person, the easier it'll be to make. So if you're struggling to write anything down and you're struggling to get work done, just keep that in mind. Pick something to write about that you actually care about. Write about something you care about. This will help motivate you to devote more time and effort to making a good argument. Uh, so when you're answering the question, yeah, but who cares? Make sure that you can say, I do. Uh, I find it extremely difficult to write anything at all or focus on or concentrate on something that I have no interest in whatsoever. It's I just don't like doing it, and I think that's the way most people are. I trudge through it, do the minimum amount of work possible, just to get it done, because I don't care. Well, you know, as informatics majors studying, basically data science, there's plenty of stuff out there to write about, to research. The academic world is your oyster, and you can always find something you care about. So a couple examples I put down here, basically the four horsemen of modern apocalypse, I guess. There's a war going on, and there's a good chance it could escalate. But even if it doesn't, we've already seen during that war, those of us that are focusing on cybersecurity, that cyber warfare is alive and well. And so the good news for us is, plenty of cyber warfare going on. It's going to be a lot of openings for cybersecurity specialists. The bad news is that there's a lot of cyber warfare going on. There's going to be a lot of openings for cybersecurity specialists, but plenty to research, plenty to write about. Uh, Other than that, you could move on to something like supply chains. What we saw with the COVID-19 virus, supply chains can be kind of fragile, and we're also going to learn more about that as the war and all the resulting sanctions and everything else, as that stuff continues. Supply lines, the supply chain is fragile, and so maybe you're motivated by things like wanting to help people not starve. And believe it or not, data science, and innovation drive supply chains, and you can help out there. There's plenty to get into there as well. Speaking of COVID-19, I know a lot of informatics majors are pursuing careers in healthcare. Uh, Again, maybe you just want to help people. Maybe you recognize that pandemics and healthcare are very important issues, and they're very important to you. And so again, plenty to write about. And finally, maybe you're just greedy. Maybe I don't want to say greedy. Maybe you're just you're motivated by self-interest. Well, if that's the case, believe it or not, they say you say oil is pretty much everything, right? And currency and commodities are kind of tied in together. But another saying you might have heard nowadays, a more modern one, is that data is the new oil. Well, again, data science and innovation are going to drive, they're going to become much more important in the future in, the finance markets, in how currency works. I mean, we're already seeing that, and we're already seeing a push towards digital currency. So, there's plenty there to work on if you just want to make it rich, you just want to make a lot of money, then you could do a lot worse than going into finance and becoming involved in a related career field. And again, as an informatics major, I think like I said, the world is kind of your oyster because everything's going to be data driven, not just the academic world, but the private sector as well. So, not that all the academic world is in the private sector, but that's neither here nor there. So again, pick something that you actually care about, that you want to write about. It makes it so much easier. I've discovered, having a military background and kind of being a military history nerd, that I can always get into stuff like that, and it always makes writing easier. Maybe you have objections to certain political ideologies, etc. There's plenty to get into. Uh, and I know it doesn't have a whole lot to do with the revision, but it is something that you should always keep in mind when you're first coming up with your thesis and your arguments. And if you're struggling, that may be something you want to think about too. If you're struggling to put together your paper, to put together your arguments, to work on it, just maybe stop and think about, it's like, wait a minute, do I actually even care about this subject? And so that's something you want to plan ahead about. Make sure, because that's going to make everything go much more smoothly and much more simply. So those are my five reminders for all future writing. And this can even be probably applied to creative writing as well as academic, most of it. So five reminders for future writing. And for our last slide, I have to put this in here. It's from Slides Go. They are the ones who are handing out the free template. So that's our presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. I enjoyed giving it, and I'll see you next time. Have a nice day.